It's a real pleasure for me to be with all of you today. I'm actually a CSUS alumni, so it's even more special for me to be here with you. Last night, my wife took me out to Mexican food, which I love, and this morning I woke up with an accent. No, the accent is from Chile, South America. So we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and the reason I enjoy it is because I need to work on this a lot. So it reminds me of some of the things that I need to work on. Interpersonal negotiation skills, which is just a fancy way of saying how to speak to somebody when we don't agree. Okay? Now, the word negotiation sounds so intimidating, yet we all negotiate. When we go down the freeway and there's a car merging, we negotiate. We have good options and bad options. Here we are traveling down the freeway and we see a car is going to merge. We have some options. So real quickly, I'm going to give you just 1 minute in your table to think of the good options and the bad options available to us. Okay, you get about 30 seconds. Go ahead. So, give me any option. An option that we have is to change lanes. Okay. I heard somebody else say go faster. Another option is to slow down. The other option is to say sorry. It's your problem, right? So at the end we have at least 4 options. I'm sure there's some other options we haven't thought about, but at least 4. And so when we drive, we negotiate. When 2 people go, only one person can go through the door at one time, and so one person goes first and another one goes after, we negotiate. So we're negotiating all day long. Anytime that there are alternatives, anytime that there's more than one way of doing something, we actually get to negotiate. So the bottom line here is that we're all experienced negotiators. We know a lot more about this field than it sounds like from the word. Okay? So when we disagree, most of the time we deal with disagreement without the need of a third-party mediator. Now, that happens to be me. I'm the third-party mediator, and my specialty is deep-seated interpersonal conflict. In other words, when people hate each other, then they call me. Okay? So, lack of negotiation skills is between a disagreement. Okay, so we have a disagreement on the one hand, and we have contention on the other hand. How would you define contention? Yeah, that's excellent. Disagreement gone really bad. It's basically hitting below the belt, right? Okay, so disagreement in itself, sometimes people say that that's conflict, but I prefer the word disagreement. Disagreement in itself is not necessarily a bad thing, because through disagreement we can think things out and we can come up with maybe a better solution that will be more long-lasting. By the way, don't feel like you have to take notes. If you want to, please feel free to do so, but when we're done, you'll get a book that I wrote for mediators. And chapter 4 is a chapter on interpersonal negotiation skills, which will cover everything that I'm saying to you today. On the other hand, what you might want to write down is there might be some thoughts that come to your mind that say, you know what, I think I'm going to call this person, or I think I'm going to do this. Those sort of thoughts are great things to write down also. So, lack of negotiation skills tends to take us from a disagreement to contention where it gets ugly. And also, not just that, because we might be an expert in negotiation skills. We might know everything there is to know about negotiation, but sometimes fear and pride also get in the way. So we're going to talk a lot about some specific skills that we can use as long as we can push aside that fear and that pride. Okay, fear that we're not going to get our way. Fear that, you know, that we let somebody be rude to us. Fear that, you know, you can fill in the blanks. So confronting conflict is not easy. And people react to conflict situations in many different sort of ways. So it's easy to hear without listening. And then, after we've had a conflict or disagreement, we seek the support of others. We look, you know, that's sort of an interesting thing because it shows how very thin our self-esteem is. If we are the type of people who, when we get into a conflict, we don't need to go find somebody else to tell us we are okay, then our self-esteem is doing a little bit better. But my experience is just almost all people is part of the human condition. After we've had a conflict, we need to share that with somebody else to reassure us that we are okay somehow. Okay? So we seek the support of other people, and those people agree with us. Why do they agree with us? Okay, maybe we chose them because they would agree with us. Okay, that's very true, yes. Okay. And now there's another reason why they agree with us besides the fact that they are our friend or our spouse and so on. You know, they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and we tell the story from our perspective. And so we go out and we take a picture, okay, and then we take another picture, and the ones we don't want, we throw away, okay? So, well, actually that's not really the way it works. We share the story from our perspective, and most of the time there are pictures that we didn't see. So in a conflict with somebody else, we're so focused on us that we often don't see the whole picture. And then, yes, there are those pictures and those parts of the story where we sort of hide them from the other person until later on. Okay, sometimes we'll share them later on. So I used to live very close to my work. And 10 minutes, whether I drove my bicycle or drove my car, okay, it was 10 minutes away. So whenever I would bicycle to work, I would say to myself, you know, these cars, these drivers, they're so rude. They really don't care at all about the cyclists. When I would bicycle to work, I would say, when I would drive my car to work, I would say, cyclists don't want to live very long. Okay? So where we sit, where we stand on something depends on where we sit. And so when we're walking, we look at the whole world from the perspective of somebody who's walking. And when we're driving, we look at the world from the perspective of somebody who's driving. And guess what? So after we tell our story, we feel justified. We are more right than ever. And so we therefore feel that, maybe we shouldn't try so hard with that person, or we may discount that person as a difficult person, or somebody who just, maybe I should just avoid them, or go out of my way not to talk to them, etc. I want to share with you a story about Don and Sue. Okay? By the way, I know there's a saying that goes like this: leave your work problems at work and leave your home problems at home. Isn't it a beautiful saying? It doesn't really work very well, right? So, actually the way I think of this is there are things we can practice at home that will give us skills at work, and vice versa. So that's the nice thing about this. So I'm going to use a home story here. Don and Sue. Don came home one day. He was so excited. He told his wife, "You know what? I get Saturday off. Why don't we go to the river this Saturday?" And Sue said, "Oh, no, Don, I really don't want to go." Don says, "Oh, yes, it's going to be so much fun." And Sue says, "Well, no, I really don't want to go." So what's going to happen if Don keeps saying yes, 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 and Sue keeps saying no, no, no? Okay, so I'll give you a minute to converse this with the people right around you on the table. Go ahead. Okay, so once again, we've got good options and bad options, right? So let's start out with some of the bad options first, okay? Some of the things that are not going to end up really well in the long run. What are some of the things that could happen? Okay, we're shy. So, okay, there you go. Okay. Find somebody else to take to the river. That's one of them. Okay. Yes, we'll be kind to some of his friends. Okay. What else?
Well, they could either go or not go, but not resolve the conflict of why.
Yes, that's a very good point. They may actually go to the river, okay? So Sue may yield and go to the river, or Don may yield to Sue and stay home. But if they go to the river, do you think that Sue's going to let Don know that she's not having a real great time? Yes. Okay, so that's a very good point. And there was okay, we covered it. Okay, so we've got a whole bunch of options of things that could go wrong. And the realistic thing I would say is that all too often we have conversations like this, and that's precisely what happens, is that things do go wrong. Okay, so I hope that by the end of this presentation you will be able to have some really good tools to take with you in order to deal with differences of opinion, whether it is at home or at work, as I mentioned. And we're going to come back to Don and Sue a little bit later. At the end of this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit more with Don and Sue. Okay, so one of the options is to yield. Another option is to avoid. Just out of curiosity, how many of you tend to be avoid people? Okay, at least one. Okay. Good. Okay. Anybody else avoid people? Okay. Yes. Good. Okay. All right. How about yield people? Okay. How many of you compete people? Okay. Now, we all have a general tendency towards one of these things that we're going to talk about right now, whether it's yielding or avoiding or competing. We have a tendency to go there, okay? And so now we're going to talk about, just really thinking through a little bit more about these options. So why do we avoid or yield generally? Yeah, it seems easier at the moment. Reduces conflict, we think, right? at the moment, not necessarily in the long run, right? So when is it a virtue to yield? Okay, yes, when the issues are not that important, yes. When else? For the good of everybody, yes. When you're wrong, yes, yes, yes. Okay, yes. You're thinking, yes. Okay. Now, I have nothing against the idea of yielding, an occasional yielding from time to time, but if it's one person who always yields, okay, let's say we have two co-workers, and one of them is always yielding to the other one, then we need to think about that a little bit more. Or we have two spouses, one is always yielding to the other one. This is a problem, and eventually it leads to withdrawal. It leads to the person being less invested in the work relationship or personal relationship and so on. So now we have compete. That's what's supposed to be applause, but okay. So whenever we compete, we have a winner. We must have a right. Okay. And the problem with competing is that winner-loser arrangements end up all too often into loser-loser arrangements where everybody loses. Okay? So that's the problem with competing. Now, am I saying that competing is bad? Well, not really. Actually, there are times when we have to be willing to compete. I'll give you an example. So let's say you like the idea of coming to an agreement with other people where everybody likes that agreement. Let's say you really like the idea of coming to an agreement, but one of the parties is not willing to come to an agreement that everybody can win with, and so this other person is just puts their foot down that they want it their way. Then that might be a time where you might actually be forced to compete and to stand up and for what you really want to do or for what you believe in and so on. So, okay, another example of competing comes from a novel I read. It was written over 100 years ago, before they knew that smoking was bad for you. And so this happened in a Russian train. This man was sitting in one of the cabins there, and in Russian trains, there's a long hallway on one side, and there are different cabins or rooms where people sit down, and especially for the really long train rides. Okay, so this one Russian man was there. He was smoking and just looking out the window, and two women come in. One of them has a little dog, lap dog, with her, and the two of them sit down, and they start looking at him as if, aren't you going to put out your cigarette? But they don't say anything to him, they just look at him. Somehow, this idea that, maybe he's going to get the fact, I'm upset, and he's going to read our mind, right? And he's going to know exactly what we want him to know and to do. It didn't work. So one of the women gets up, she opens the window of the train, and goes to the man, takes a cigarette from off his mouth, and throws it out the window. And then she closes the window. And they sit down. The man who had been smoking just looks at them. He doesn't seem angry. He doesn't seem upset. He waits for a few minutes. He gets up. He opens up the window. He takes the dog from her lap. He throws it out the window and closes the window. Okay? So, that story came from Dostoevsky's book, The Idiot. Okay? So the point is, that's competing, okay? So the women now, are they going to keep competing? Is it going to get getting higher and higher and more violent? Okay, isn't that what happens today sometimes? Is people just don't know when to quit, right? Then we have compromise. Okay, now compromise, a question for your tables will be, is it a good word or a bad word? And if so, why and when? Okay, so I'll give you a minute to discuss that. Compromise, go ahead. Just a show of hands, how many of you think of compromise as a good word? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you think of compromise as maybe not such a good word? Raise your hand. Okay, several. Don't be ashamed. That's good. Okay. The people who raise their hand, tell me why is compromise good?
Everybody wins.
Okay.
Good to compromise, depending what the situation is. You know, it might not be a win situation, but if you compromise this time, next time, the other person maybe will compromise as well, and then it doesn't have to always be I win because this is what I want to do and what I want to say. It's just understanding both sides and come to an agreement that maybe it's not what you wanted or what I wanted, but it works.
Okay. That's
Other times it might not be so good because if one person always is the one compromising.
okay. When one person is always compromising, that's called yielding. Okay. So compromise means, by definition, that both sides are yielding together. That's a compromise. So what you're saying is that both people can win, and that's true. So compromise can be a really good thing, can be, okay. But I like what you just said. That compromise means that both people, neither of them gets what they want sometimes. Okay, so both of them actually may be losing. So let me just illustrate. Sometimes we go for compromise because of our fear. That's one of the things. We have fear, and we have a little bit of a lack of creativity. Okay, two young girls were coming back from school. They got off the bus, were running just as fast as they could into the house, and the mother, who was looking out the window waiting for them to come home, noticed that they were pushing each other a little bit as they were coming into the house, and said, what's going on? The two young ladies who normally never fought, here they were pushing each other, trying to get into the house first. And so the oldest daughter says, Mom, I called the orange first. And the youngest daughter says, no, I called the orange first. And they knew there was only one orange left. And so what do you think the mother did? Okay, cut it in half. Does that sound like a good solution? Okay. Well, here's what happened. Here's what happened. The oldest daughter took her half an orange and used it against a grater to prepare some orange cupcakes that she was cooking for a cooking project, and threw away the inside. And the youngest daughter threw away the peel and ate her inside of the orange. When they could have both had what? The full orange. So sometimes compromise is fantastic, but sometimes compromise is taking a shortcut solution to a problem without really understanding the problem. Now, do you think that's realistic, that something like that could have happened? Does it happen in life day to day that we talk to each other to see what it is that the other person really wants? Okay, where we make assumptions that we want the same thing and therefore we're competing for something. Okay, so compromise, therefore, was a solution to this particular problem that was not the most elegant solution possible. So we're going to talk a little bit now about negotiation power. How can we become more powerful negotiators? And by the way, I was once invited to mediate among two top managers. And when I was done, the owner of the operation wanted me to know what were the tricks that we used so he could use them against his wife. So by definition, he didn't understand what negotiation is. Because by definition, negotiation means that both people have to win in the long run. If only one person is winning, then in the long run, both people will lose. Okay? So we're going to talk about some things to do and some things to avoid. Albert Ellis said, "You largely feel the way you think, and you can change your thinking and thereby your feeling." So let's translate that to English. Basically what he's saying is that we cannot have a negative emotion such as anger, envy, jealousy, or any other negative feeling without telling ourselves a story first. Now the word story, some people don't like the word story because it implies it's false. And I don't mean that it's false. It could be a narrative if you prefer the word narrative. But you're telling yourself something that makes the situation worse. Okay? So they say that nobody can get angry unless they're telling themselves a story first, or jealous, or envious, etc. Okay? And that's a really good point. That indeed, we are very good at creating stories. One person came to talk to another one. She said, "I'm so tired of you," she said. "You're so rude. I say hello whenever I see you out in town and you never answer back." What she didn't know is that that man that she was talking to was legally blind and could see only a tiny bit ahead and could not see when she was waving. Okay, so we tend to make stories, and day after day we make a little single sentence story. Oh, how rude that person! Okay, into a paragraph, and a paragraph into a chapter, and a chapter into a book, and a book into the 20-volume history of Chile. Okay, so I'll give you an example. One time I was invited to give a very formal talk, one of those, white shirt and tie and jacket and all of that. And in the very, very, very back of the room, this young man, every time I spoke, would lean over and whisper pretty things into the ears of the young lady that was sitting beside him. So I would stop talking. And he'd stop, and then start again, and then he'd start flirting again, talking to her and so on, until I totally was so distracted I couldn't even continue. Well, at the end I found out, when I talked to the person who invited me, and I said, how impolite of that young man to have been talking while I was giving my presentation. The person who invited me said, "Oh, Gregorio, that young lady is a visitor from Japan and he was interpreting for her." I felt about that big. Okay, so we tell ourselves stories. And so one of the negotiation tips is manage our stories. Don't think of the very worst of other people. And it's interesting. If we are late, we have an excuse. If somebody else is late, they're always late. Okay, here's another negotiation tip. People value validation. We all want to be valued. Okay? Cars run on fuel. Airplanes run on fuel. our little phones run on electricity. People run on validation to a great extent. And so everybody projects to some degree or other. We project who we are or how we want to be perceived. And so, sometimes you have somebody who's got music on so loud in the car next door, and their car is just shaking and you can hear it in your own car. Okay? They are projecting who they are. Okay, remember that. Now, when they're projecting who they are in the middle of the night and you're trying to sleep, well, that's another story, right? But people project an image, either as a sports person, an intellectual, a family individual, a scientist, and so on. We have all sort of projections that we project who we are. So, there's a question I really like to ask people, and it's this. Deep, deep inside, who are you? Deep, deep inside. Do I have a volunteer who would be willing to share that? Okay. Share it with your neighbor, okay? So please share it with your neighbor and do that for about a minute and then have your neighbor share with you. Deep, deep inside, who are you? Okay. I have a colleague at UC Berkeley that says, I'm sorry to interrupt your education in order to continue with the seminar. Which is really true, because what you're discussing at the table it's really much more interesting, but I'm going to leave it to you as an assignment. Now, my kids, I think the job of fathers is to embarrass their children sometimes. And, at the store, I would talk to people, and my children would get really embarrassed by that and so on. And when we're in the long line at the store, sometimes we strike up a conversation with somebody ahead of us, might as well pass the time and talk a little bit. And in one situation, I actually scared the person ahead of me, and so they went to a different line. So I thought, well, this is going to work really well. So I started the conversation with the next person, and, well, they didn't leave, so we had a good conversation. But so I guess when we start a conversation, which, by the way, we never do in an elevator, do we? The elevator, we look at the ground and so on, and psychologists tell us that in an elevator, the more cramped the elevator, the more we pretend that we are alone. Okay? So, I'm not suggesting that, how a conversation starter is, oh boy, it's been really a beautiful, what a beautiful end of September we're having. That would be a great conversation starter. And normally we stay and talk to people right here on the surface. Now, I'm not suggesting that when you're on the line in the market, that you ask somebody, deep, deep inside. Right? So, I think it's something would be good to know about the people we work with. It'd be good to know about the people we work with deep, deep inside. What are they all about? When we often keep it, we think we know sometimes, but we keep things oftentimes at the safe level. And it's important. For instance, one person deep, deep inside explained that she was competent, that getting things done right was important to her, that people could call on her, that she is the source of wisdom, okay? So obviously it would be a very, very poor negotiation technique to call such a person incompetent, because boom, the gate now closed, the mind is no longer there, and conversation ended basically when that sort of thing happens, right? Now, there's something called the 3-minute listen. Okay? And so now I'm going to ask you before, we're going to do this in steps. The first step is not just deep inside, who are you? This is a little bit more surface-like. Can you think of 2 or 3 things that you love? Okay? 2 or 3 things that you love, whether it is participating or watching or, so we're not talking at the deepest level here, we're talking about, a fun thing to do. So now you can share, okay? Could anybody share with me just 1 or 2 things, just one thing that you enjoy doing? Disneyland, okay. I heard something from over, yes?
Playing golf.
Playing golf, okay, excellent, okay. Decorating.
Spending time with my family.
Okay, spending time with the family, wonderful.
Snorkeling.
Snorkeling, excellent. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to pick on Kelly's snorkeling. Okay. So Kelly, could you please come up here for a moment? I made you think you were safe, right? Okay. So here's what the 3-minute listen is about. You have the easy part.
Okay.
Okay. The 3-minute listen is to get Kelly to talk about snorkeling for 1.5 minutes. I call it 3 minutes because that's a great amount of time. But when I put my chronometer on, usually after 1 minute and 20 seconds, it's gone. Okay, because especially in front of so many people, it's very hard. Okay, so I need a volunteer. Oh, great, good. So if you could come up here and you are, I'm going to give you instructions. Okay. Okay. Here's the instructions. To the degree that you use body language and minimal responses like, interesting, those sort of things, but don't ask any questions, you will be a successful 3-minute listener, okay? So the idea is, how when we say is that if we're talking to somebody and they don't respond, we stop talking? Yes, we stop talking because we think they're judging us. But here, you show with your body language, you show that you are listening, okay? And so you're allowed to ask her 1 question to get started with. And then you're going to just listen.
Tell me what it's like to snorkel at Tunnels.
Tunnels is on the north shore of Kauai, and to get to Tunnels, you have to find a place to park, which is very challenging because there are no parking spaces. You have to find a side street where nobody's parked, so you need to get there at about 7 in the morning. And then you need to trek through some trails to get to the beach and find a nice place on the beach to land. And then when you get in the water, you see all these beautiful fish and coral, and if you've gotten your little reef card from Snorkel Bob's, you can identify what some of those fish are. And it just removes you from every day, and it's just relaxing and peaceful, and it's just for me kind of a spiritual experience, and whether it's Tunnels or anywhere else.
So do I ask more questions?
How long did I go?
38 seconds. Okay, now, you can speak up, don't leave yet. Okay, so this is a normal thing, okay? Now, what is your name?
Stan.
Okay, Stan, were you feeling like the pressure of the world a little bit over your back?
Of eyes.
Yes. But
were you feeling eyeball?
Were you feeling a little bit of pressure as to what's going to be an intelligent question I could ask?
No, because I've been there.
Okay.
So I was going to ask her next to compare it to another beach. But
okay. So, but see, if you're asking her to compare it to another beach, then who is leading the conversation? Okay, so the goal here is not for you to safely lead the conversation. Okay, because why do we lead the conversation? Is because we're afraid we're going to run out of questions, right? Okay, partly. So now the job will be to just show Kelly that you're interested, and you could tell me more. That would be okay, or I'm interested, or just show it with your face. And when she pauses, Okay, here's the trick. When people pause, that means, oh, it's my turn. I've got to talk. I've got to say something. Don't be afraid not to interrupt the pause. Don't be afraid to wait through the pause. Now, you know how at the beginning I asked several people for volunteers to answer some questions, and at the end I give up a little bit and because there's so many of you, I said, okay, I'm not going to make the point here, okay? But sometimes as a speaker, I get invited to, another country and so on, and I don't even know the people at all, and I ask for a volunteer, and then I'll stand here and wait. And I'll wait until somebody feels the pressure more than I do. Okay, so in the 3-minute talk, the pause, okay, the idea that Stan, if he doesn't ask a question, then he's putting the pressure on Kelly to continue to talk, and Kelly will continue to talk as long as Stan shows that he's interested, which he did a really good job of showing. He was smiling, he was doing all the right things to say, I'm really interested, Kelly, when you're telling me. Okay, so we'll let you ask any question you want to get started, and then we're going to time you again.
I hope you guys like to hear about snorkeling.
Is it on the same subject or something else?
Same subject.
Same subject. Did you see any turtles?
Oh, I'll have to remember when we were at Tunnels. It was about 4 years ago that I actually snorkeled there, and I don't remember if I saw turtles there. However, 2 years ago when we were at Anini Beach, there was a turtle that was out there, and I was following the turtle, and then I look up and I see that I'm like heading straight up to the open sea. I think the turtle wanted to take me to like the Turtle King or something. So fortunately, Anini's very shallow, so even if I stood up, it was probably not over my head. But saw the turtle there, and then this last time we went, didn't actually see them in the water, but we were on Oahu, and there's a beach they call, it's Lanaki, I think, but it's called Turtle Beach, where the turtles feed, and they come up on the beach and rest, and there's busloads of tourists that stop there. But I wandered down away from the crowd, and there was this little guy fishing on the, off of the beach by himself, and probably saw a couple dozen turtles altogether there that day. And then the first day I got there, we were on Waikiki at a restaurant that fronts Waikiki Beach, and you cook your own steaks there, your own food, and so I'm standing by the grill, I'm standing by the water, and this little turtle came swimming up just to say hello to me, so that was pretty cool. You might notice I kind of like turtles. And then on our last day there was a turtle off our balcony that came to say goodbye to me. So that's my turtle story.
And where's Anini?
Anini is on the north shore of Kauai.
Ah.
Yeah.
Let's give him an applause. Okay, we're going to grade Stan. We're at the university, right? So we get grade. Okay, so first of all, 1:44. Not bad. Okay. Now, Stan's job is to convince Kelly that he's so interested, and when people are really interested, how long will they talk? Forever. Right? Okay, so his job was to convince Kelly that he was interested. I think he did a really good job. Now, when Kelly said that she was done, what happened then? He asked her another question. And what did we say about asking another question? We're leading the conversation. We are taking the conversation where we want it to go. Okay, so your second homework assignment, your first homework assignment is to find out how people are validated, what deep inside, what it is that moves them, okay? Your second assignment is to try the 3-minute listen and show so much interest with your face, by short little responses, body language, that you don't ask questions, okay? And when you don't ask questions, and you allow for the pause, then Kelly would eventually continue to speak, and she would take us snorkeling wherever she wanted to snorkel with us, okay? Or she might take us a completely different direction unknown to us, okay? Yes.
But if you want to know, I mean, like in that instance, I want to know where that was.
Right.
What do I send her a letter after?
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yes, yes. Yeah. Yes. So, you're really curious, right? Yes.
But is the point though of you were a participant girl, I think the whole time, I wonder where that's at. You're not listening to her what she's saying.
Precisely. What? It's not about us. Okay, this is really key. The 3-minute listen is not about us. It's about getting other people to talk about their passion, and we may assume that something is their passion sometimes. In this case, we had a pretty good tip, right? We know that Kelly's passion, she was willing to share it with us, okay? But sometimes we make an assumption about somebody's interest or passion, and it might not be. Or they may have something else that is weighing on them that day that they really want to talk about. And are we open to hearing that? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to move forward from this, but the idea is this is an assignment to practice and to see how many seconds can you stand a pause. Okay. If you're doing better than 11 seconds, you're doing extremely well. Okay. If that's a lot, 11 seconds is a lot. Okay. If you're doing better than 3 seconds, even that is fantastic. Okay. So don't be afraid of the pause, and don't be afraid of the person we're talking to leading us to wherever that you want to go. Okay. Any questions about this before I move forward? Yes.
So the 3-minute exercise, you don't interrupt it. In a normal conversation is that, I'm just trying to make the connection between the two different situations.
Yes. The 3-minute listen is a negotiation tool to think of the other person as a real human being. Okay? And what often happens in a normal conversation is that people compete to talk. Okay? In a normal conversation, both people are trying to, and I did this, and oh yes, and this happened to me too, and I did. Okay, so there's a competition for conversation and for talking time. The 3-minute talk is making it all about them so that you can think of the other person as a real person. And this particular tool is important. Let's say one of your teenage children makes you upset. This is a great deal. Okay, before you get into what made you upset, think of that person, of that child. Allow yourself to feel what they're feeling and think what they're thinking for a moment before you ever get into the conversation you want to have about something else. Yes.
Could you provide some tips on what to do if you're really not? If someone was actually
Okay. This is a very good point. Now, keep in mind that this is a negotiation tool, okay? At the same time, one time I was giving this seminar, I told the person who asked me that question in the other seminar, okay? So thank you for that question. I said, in a way, it's sort of our obligation to be wide enough in interest to be interested in what other people have to tell us. It's sort of up to us to make it interesting. So remember we talked about one negotiation tool is that we tell ourselves something, and if we say to ourselves, oh, this is so boring, okay, then it's going to be boring. So part of it is to convince ourselves in a way that it's not boring. Because it's all about them. And so if your friend wants to talk to you about trains and you're so bored and you don't want to hear any more about trains, for instance, because you're bored with the trains, still, if you're using the 3-minute conversation as a technique, which, by the way, technique sounds like really cheap, doesn't it? You know, techniques. In a way, we start out using these things as a technique, and then we start incorporating them into who we are. And we become people who are really interested in others more. Which is really hard for me to say, because my wife calls me a Mexican spur. And I'll tell you why. Okay, so a Mexican spur has 5 points or 6 only. And between the little rowel points, there's nothing. Okay? So I have like my 5 topics that I'm passionate about. And about the rest, okay, so I've got to work with this. So I will join you in working on this. And so after telling people they have to be interested in others, the thought came to my mind that my youngest daughter, she has a favorite book. It's called Gideon. And I started reading it, and I almost cried. I was so bored. Okay? And so after 10, and she begged me to read it. So after 10 pages, I had to put it down. I just couldn't do it. And then I thought, you know what? You've got to practice what you preach. So guess what? As a gift to her, I read the whole book. And guess what? Before I ended the book, I actually got to like it. And then I called her and I told my daughter I had read her favorite book. Do you think that is more of a gift than just about anything material that I could give her? Right? I give her of my time. Okay, so we're going to talk about the 3-minute listen, and we're going to apply it in a moment, okay? Here's another negotiation tip. Okay, so the one we just did for the moment will say, allow things to be about the other person too. Not everything is about us, okay? Here's another one. After losing face, don't give up. Okay, so the word honeymoon, I want to use it in a broad sense. I don't mean it necessarily just, the period, after people get married, that, everything is beautiful and happy, okay? But it could be anybody, when you come to work. You might have a honeymoon, so to speak, relationship with your co-workers or with your supervisors and so on. At the end, honeymoons end. Now, they don't really have to end, okay? But generally they end, okay? And when do they end? Or what is a honeymoon? Can somebody just define for me what a honeymoon is using sort of the examples I've been giving you? How would you say, what am I calling something a honeymoon?
So everyone gets along with everybody, everything is new and exciting. You don't really know what you're going to be doing, and then you learn.
Yes.
This is all I'm here to do, and honeymoon is over.
Okay, so the honeymoon part, okay, is this is exciting, and we are going out of our way, okay, to be accommodating. If we know the other person cares about something, we go out of our way to make it special for that person. And we keep making it about them, right? That's partly what and a honeymoon, in theory, doesn't have to end. A honeymoon, as long as both people continue to make life important about the other one, it doesn't have to end. So, but when does it end is when one of the two people decides that, maybe they got really tired, maybe they're hungry, for whatever reason, because those things like being tired and hungry make us more cranky, okay? So lack of sleep also make us cranky. difficult situations, scary situations. There's a whole bunch of things that can make things more difficult. And so we show, instead of putting our best foot forward, we put our worst foot forward, or not so good foot forward. And whenever people fight, what I say they're doing is they're regressing to their pre-teenage years or younger, to what they did to get their way. Okay, I'll repeat that. Anytime that we are fighting with other people, we are regressing to the way we got our way when we were really young. Okay? We're having a temper tantrum. That's what it is. It's no more and no less than that. So have you met cranky old people, okay, who who have given up on the world and don't even try? See, when we meet somebody new, don't we try and impress them? Don't we try and come across with our best foot forward? Don't we try that? Okay. Have you met people who have stopped trying? Yes. Okay. We need people from time to time who have stopped trying. And here's this negotiation technique. After we blow it, okay, after we get really angry or really upset or really something, okay, something ugly, and our co-worker sees it, our supervisor sees it, our spouse sees it, this negotiation technique, I believe, is probably the most important of all. After we have lost face, don't give up. Continue to try and be the person that someday you want to be, but that today you are not. Continue to try and be the person that we would like to be someday, even though we're nowhere near being that today. I believe that goes a long way. Giving and accepting apologies. This is a very important thing, okay? As a mediator, I want to tell you about a recent mediation, and I do all sorts of types of mediation. This man had really offended a woman, and he decided that he did not want to apologize. Instead, he was going to try and become a better person. May I suggest that that's not enough, okay? So it's not enough to apologize and say, I'm so sorry, and then continue to be the person we are and not even try. See, that's not any good either. But to just try and change who we are in order to not have to say the words. See, in effect, this is a topic which we could spend a long time on, a proper apology, but I'm going to try and say the following, just to keep it short. If we have hurt somebody else's feelings, we have to be able to feel the pain that we've caused. If we're not willing to feel the pain that we have caused another person, then it's not ever going to be a true apology. And we don't get to decide when the other person needs to forgive us. So if we hurt somebody else, we cannot put it... So I hurt somebody. I cannot put a timetable and say, okay, this person needs to forgive me right away. I cannot do that. That shows a lot of lack of humility on my part. Okay, so basically, a proper apology involves not only changing our behavior, but allowing the other person to hurt and to tell us how much we have hurt them also. Accepting apologies is also so important, to be able to gracefully accept apologies. But remember that some sort of pain that we cause other people is not as simple as just saying, oh, you're still hurting about that? Well, that's strange. Okay? So, some pain is very, very deep. Okay, another thing to think about is the little hammer. Okay? I will define the little hammer as trying to put our perspective and saying, giving our opinion, or getting, more than giving our opinion, actually, let me take that back, getting the conversation going, okay? So, the little hammer is getting the conversation going in less than 7 words, speaking softly, slowly, tentatively, briefly. The definition, 7 words, is brief. I think sometimes somebody will come to me and say, oh, Gregorio, what you did here was really bad. And I go, oh yeah, they're right. But then they continue to repeat the same thing that they just said in 32 different ways. Okay, so the first time they told me that it was bad, I felt really bad about what I had done. And by time number 15 or 16, then I was no longer caring about what I did bad. Okay, I was now so irritated about the fact that I needed to hear it over and over and over. So, 7 words is a technique, once again, where we introduce a topic that we want to talk to about. And I'm going to give an example of when and how I used this technique at my own office, okay, with the person who is now my boss, so who's really a wonderful person, by the way. So this happened about 3 or 4 years ago. We have this beautiful office at the Agricultural Extension Office. They have, you know, the whole building is beautiful. It's brand new, or it's almost brand new. And this one set of colleagues had a meeting, and they wrote up all of these things and put them up on the board, put their little paper on the wall. And I thought to myself, oh, this wall is impeccable. It's so beautiful. It's just so beautiful wall. I'm sure they'll take it off. You know, they'll take it off the wall by 5 o'clock. Oh yes, I'm sure they will. No, it didn't go off that day, or the next day, or the next week, or the next 2 months. It was still there. And I was having this internal conversation. So now you know, Gregorio, he's a little bit of a type A person, right? And which is sort of weird, because if you see my office, it's really in total chaos and disorder. So here I am worrying about somebody else putting a little piece of paper on the wall, and my office is a disaster. But anyway, so it is. So I'm having this conversation, and I finally say to myself, now, all my colleagues, they specialize in different things. I'm the only one who specializes on interpersonal relations and human relations. So who are you going to ask opinion from if not yourself? Okay, so you better do something about this, right? And follow your own advice. So I did. I walked up to my colleague's office, or I went walking to her office, and her door was already open, and so I just knocked. Oh, come on in, Gregorio. And so I came in, and I used the 3-minute period of conversation. I knew at that time that she was she was applying for a job that was really interesting, and doing some really interesting things. So I asked her a question until I felt that she wasn't just the person who put the paper up on the wall. I felt she was a person. Okay? So the 3-minute talk is all about seeing the other person as a person. And until we can see the other person as a real person, then whatever we're going to say is likely to come across wrong. A friend of mine said, anytime you're angry or have other negative emotions and you approach somebody else to talk to them, it is likely you're going to put your foot in the wrong place. Okay? And so I listened, and when she was done talking, and this wonderful conversation about her future plans, Then I began to turn, okay? I began to lift my right hand and turn. I said, by the way, I lifted my hand, I started to turn to point outside. I didn't get even halfway, and she said, oh, yes, I've got to put those down. I had never spoken to anybody about the posters, okay? And she said, I've got to take those down. That's what I call the little hammer, okay? Where it's so soft that the other person doesn't feel that you made them lose face, okay? Now, I could have been false, and I could have said, and very insincere, and said, oh, no, I wasn't here to talk to you about that, right? But no, the whole point is, I said, that would be wonderful, I said, and then I didn't leave, okay? Had I left at that point, once again, it looks like just a little negotiation tool. I just stayed and chatted with her for a while, and then I left. I came up with a little saying a few months ago that in interpersonal relations, there are no shortcuts. We either pay now, in other words, we take the time now, or we pay later. And if we pay later, we pay with interest. So if we react in a negative way to somebody else, we are going to have to spend time trying to convince ourselves, now do I really need to apologize to that person? We're going to bring our friends in and say, do I need to apologize to that person because I said this? And they're going to say, no, you're right, and they're wrong and they deserved it. I'm surprised that that's all you said to them, right? Okay. So, now, once again, negotiation. What were my bad options I had regarding the poster? If we think, rather than going to talk to her, what were my bad options? Okay, I could have taken it down, and once I took it down, where do I put this poster? On her desk, right? Okay. Or, and at what time of the day do I do that? Right, when nobody's there to see me, right? Or, you know how when cars are dirty, people write clean me or wash me? Okay, I could put a little sticker on top, in her little poster and say, take me down, right? Or I could go and talk to all my co-workers and say, is it me or, is that poster bothering you too? It's been there for months? Okay. And even worse, I can go and talk to my supervisor and say, don't you think this person should take down that poster? See, these are all the many options that we have, okay? And or I could continue to just, in my head, argue with myself every day about the fact that I don't like the posters, right? So there's a whole bunch of options that we have. And negotiation skills are important in order to do the right thing here. Any comment before I move on to? Yes. And so in email, okay, in my case, I love email because if somebody says something really, really, really nasty to me in an email, I can go out of my way to make it nice because I can think through, let me think, and I can write it and say, no, that didn't quite seem as nice enough, okay, and I can make it nice in return. It's a little bit harder when somebody says something really not so nice right in your face, right? So, but emails, the problem with emails is that people often don't take the time to say it nice, and it escalates and it looks, even uglier, right? Okay, any comments or questions about the little hammer? Okay, I want to share with you a little hammer that we used in a mediation situation. I developed two models. I developed a model of mediation called the party-directed mediation, and I developed another model of mediation called the negotiated performance appraisal for dealing with supervisors and subordinates. In this particular situation, there was a conflict between a supervisor and a subordinate And one of the problems of many was the subordinate did not like the idea of working for a woman. Okay? So we tried to use the little hammer approach. And we spoke to her and we said, you know, she was telling us that one of the issues in the conflict. And she said, well, I don't want to just, for that to just come up in the conversation so that the person is not prepared. Good call. Okay, so we said, she wanted to bring it up first. So we said, okay, will you please talk to this person and bring it up, but if he becomes defensive, just let it go. Okay? And we will deal with this, but we're going to use what I call positive fermentation. That positive fermentation is when somebody knows that they're doing something that's not right, but it takes time before they convince themselves that in reality it isn't right. And instead of shoving it down their face, that we are allowing the person to take the time that they need to do it themselves. So, indeed, she brought it up. She said, you know, I feel sometimes that you treat me differently because I'm a woman. He got very defensive. She dropped it. She went on to talk about some other things in that conversation she had with him. And as we got ready for the joint session, okay, using what I call the pre-caucus, we had several meetings with both parties before the joint meeting. This person began, you know, the manager who the manager whose boss was a female, began to soften on this area and began to say things like, you know, maybe there is something about this, right? So eventually, when we got to the joint session, we were doing a public mediation. By public mediation, I mean we had 7 mediators who had come from Chile, okay, to see one of these negotiated performance appraisals in action, and there was a couple more people there in the room, and we were watching this conversation. So at one moment, this man, all on his own, is talking to his supervisor and says, you know, I think that it's been hard for me dealing with a female supervisor. Now, one of my fellow Chilean mediators got very uncomfortable and wanted this guy to say face. And so he said, oh, you don't mean that. You mean because there's a conflict, you know, this is going on. So he turned around to look at him and said, no, I really have been treating her differently because she's a woman. And then she turns back and faces his supervisor and says, and I want to apologize to you. So very, very powerful. And so the little hammer means we don't have to just repeat things over and over and over. And if we say it gently enough and softly enough, slowly, tentatively, and leave it with the person, there's a good chance that person will mature over time and think through that without being coerced into changing. It's been a long time since I have had anything alcoholic to drink, so I asked Kelly to bring me some juice for this demonstration. In Chile, we celebrate the 17th, 18th, and 19th of December as our Independence Day. And around our farm area, okay, I'm from a place called San Javier in Chile, there's a lot of people who, our family makes wine, and that's the thing of the region, and people tend to sometimes, having 3 days off, get a little carried away, okay? So this one guy comes stumbling towards me, and said, Patroncito, ¿se servió una copita de tinto? Which in very drunk Chilean means, my boss, would you like a little cup of red wine? So I said, no, I'm good, thank you. And so he said, oh, oh, se le nota que no es nada chileno, pues. Oh, I can tell you're not a true Chilean. Oh, that hurt. I said, may I please have that cup? Salud, pues. Okay? So, to your health. So I said, salud. I said, muchas gracias, thank you so much. And this farm worker was looking at me with his eyes about this big, and he said to me, you just blew it. I said, what did I do wrong? He said, let me tell you what the people do. When somebody comes up to you with a glass of wine, well, you hold it in your hand and you talk. And when you finish talking, you give it back. Or you hold it in your hand and you talk, and you take one sip and you give it back. But you don't drink the whole thing. So, this is my next negotiation tip. Conversation, you don't either take zero or the whole thing. Okay? So when somebody tries to ask you a question, and if you answer, did you see the game last night? That's one extreme. That's the Gregorio who wouldn't even hold the glass. Okay? Who said, basically, no thank you. And the other Gregorio is the one who you said, did you watch the game last night? And he talked to you for 2 hours and never checked whether you were awake. Okay? So, the negotiation tip here is that you need to take, according to Suselle Elgin, who wrote a book called More on the Gentle Art of Verbal Self-Defense, she said, you say about 4 sentences, and then you give it back to the other person. Okay? But you shouldn't be taking much more than 4 sentences. And then it becomes ping, pong, ping, pong. So to be a good negotiator, if you're doing all the talking, that's a problem. Okay? If they're talking a lot, that's okay. That's okay. But if you're doing a lot of the talking, and you find yourself negotiating, and you're doing a lot of the talking, beware. Avoid being defensive. Okay, let me check on. Okay. Avoid being defensive. It's really easy to get defensive, isn't it? And I used to be a soccer referee, and this red card was very, very well deserved. But when we had a referee meeting on Saturday, the head referee was talking about how a red card had been given that Saturday that was not really appropriate. And so, after he went on for a little while and he really didn't have his facts right, I raised my hand and I said, you don't really have your facts right. You weren't there. The red card that I gave was totally merited. He stopped for a second and he said, Gregorio, we weren't talking about you. So there's a saying that sometimes we run at the sound of a falling leaf. Maintain your integrity. Saying the truth and being a person of integrity is so important in being a good negotiator. I remember one time, back in the time when people would negotiate through a handshake. My parents, who, as I mentioned, are grape growers in Chile, had set a price for the wine, and the price was a typical price, but then we had this huge frost. And all of the people in the north and south of us had lost their crops. And so the crop was worth 3 times or 4 times more. So my parents brought us all into a room, and starting with my oldest daughter, with my oldest sister, brought all 5 children into the room, and starting with my oldest sister said, so we have a gentleman's agreement that this is the price. We have nothing signed. And so my sister said, well, I think you need to respect your gentleman's agreement. And I was the second oldest, and I said, yes, absolutely, I think you need to respect your agreement. And so the rest of my brothers and sisters said the same thing. At the time, I was so impressed because my parents said, we will do just as you have suggested. So at that time, I thought that my parents really were paying attention to what we were doing. Now I realize it was a teaching moment, that they already knew what their plan was. Stephen Covey said, seek first to understand, then to be understood. And basically it says that when there's a conflict, both people try at the same time to talk. And if we let the other person talk first, that's a good thing. Now, I'd like to tweak this a little bit, okay? Stephen Covey is saying, and change it a little bit, and do a psychological contract with the person. In what sense? If I have a conflict with Stan, okay, and we have this difference of opinion, and I say, and I'm looking like I'm really interested, okay, and at the very end, when Stan finishes, because I let him go first, then I say, but I think you're wrong. Okay, then all the goodwill that I built up is lost. So instead, I suggest that we say something like this. I really want to hear your perspective first. And when you're finished, I'd like to share mine. And then we can talk and see where we go from here. So then I don't spend my time thinking about how I'm going to argue against Stan. Okay? I put all of my thinking to one side and I focus 100% on what Stan is telling me, trying to think through what he's saying, what are his needs, and so on. Why does he have this opinion? What is it that is driving him? And that's going to make me much more effective. It's a good thing to ask permissions to ask questions. So if we have a really tough thing we want to bring up, by saying, do you mind if I ask you a tough question? It puts the other person ready not to get defensive. And we need to avoid telling somebody that we disagree, that you're wrong, that have the wrong perspective, or any of its synonyms. Okay? Now, am I saying we cannot disagree? No, not at all. We can definitely disagree. But we never have to use the word disagree to show disagreement. All we have to say is, Stan, if I understand correctly, here are some of the things that you believe. By the way, explaining to Stan the things that I think he believes, and if I do it softly, slowly, and tentatively, so he can correct me and say, Gregorio, you almost got it. Okay? Here's what I really believe. And then I try it. So Stan, am I understanding right? These are your points? And when he says yes, then I say, let me share with you some of my views. And so I never had to say I disagree or you're wrong. So anytime I tell somebody I disagree or you're wrong, unfortunately I did that last week, so okay, and as soon as I said it, I said, okay, you need to give this talk again. Okay? One of these days I'm going to do it right? Okay, so every time that I don't tell people I disagree, because telling somebody I disagree or you're wrong is I'm not allowing them to save face. Okay? So if I don't allow somebody to save face, I'm not going to be a good negotiator. By definition, that person who cannot save face is not going to want to deal with me. We can accentuate mutual interests. We can talk about how we both have this goal together. Okay, that will also be helpful. And when somebody brings a proposal to you that you don't like, never tell them at that moment that you don't like it. It's really important that you say, can I have until this afternoon? Or can I think this through? Or can I give you an answer tomorrow? Okay, instead of saying right away. For two reasons. One is sometimes when we think it through, the other person actually had a good idea. And number two, when people bring a proposal to us, they are not in a really good position to actually hear our counter proposal back. Now, I'm not saying that little disagreements we can't disagree on. I'm saying the more important the disagreement, the more important the issue, the more invested the two people are, the more important that this principle is. Develop double vision means simply that we learn how to look at things from the other person's perspective as well as from our own. If we can learn to look at things from other people's perspective, and in my job right now, that is actually my job. So I have two jobs at the University of California. One of them, I am a mediator, and the other part is I work with employers in helping them increase worker productivity. And so sometimes an employer will call me and say, Gregorio, I'm thinking of doing this. And before I give him an answer, I take an imaginary coin, okay, and I throw it up in the air. Let's leave the coin up in the air for a moment. We don't know when it lands, whether it's going to be heads or tails. And I say to myself, now, I want to pretend that maybe I will be the worker that he's talking about. So, how would I like that supervisor to deal with me if I'm the worker that he's talking to me about? Or maybe I will be the supervisor. Now the coin fell, I look at it, and you know what? It doesn't really matter whether it's heads or tails, because the advice I gave that employer would be good either way. So when we negotiate with other people, ask yourself what their needs are and their perspective are, and come up with solutions that are fair for both. Here's an interesting one. Human beings are so good at solutions. Remember back to the freeway where we had 4 options and we don't have a long time to make decisions. We have to, boom, make a decision. Either go a little bit faster or a little bit slower, or move over, right? We need to make those decisions in an instant of a second. We cannot have a committee decision. We cannot ask other people in the car, do you think I should, right? Okay. So human beings are so good at the quick solution that we often don't stop to understand the real problem. So part of being a good negotiator is really, really understanding the real problem. Oh, finally, Dawn and Sue. Okay, so I want to share with you as my last one of the tips, the Harvard negotiation approach. It's so interesting. The simpler things are the ones that work really well. So Dawn says, I want to go to the river. And Sue says, I really don't want to go. So those are their stances or their position. Okay? So anytime you have an argument, by definition, people have a different position on the matter. And position, another way to say that is your best solution. Okay? Positions are our best solution. It's what we want to happen. That's our position. What the Harvard people say is, behind and below every position, there are unmet needs and there are fears. And if we can understand the other person's unmet needs and fears, we have a better chance. Now notice we're not saying it's 100%, okay? we have a better chance to solve the problem. So Don came to the seminar and really got it, and Sue did not go to the seminar. So Don arrived, and this time he did it a little bit differently. He said, Sue, you tell me you don't want to go to the river. Notice he didn't say why not, because the word why sounds very accusative, okay? Instead, he asked a what question. Almost every why question can be turned into a what question. So he says, Sue, what is it? And he says it slowly enough that it's convincing to her that he really wants to know. Because sometimes we ask a question that is really like a loaded question, as if we had taken off a gun and we're shooting away at them, right? Okay, so, Sue, what is it about the river that you don't seem to want to go there? So she believed him that he really wanted to know. So she said, we live so far away from town, and it's a 45-minute drive. I'm with the 3 boys, taking my 3 little boys, to town to get the stuff and all that. It just, He said, well, I need to go into town usually about twice a week to get some parts and some things that this employer wants me to purchase. Would you like to give me a list of things, regardless of whether we go to the river or not, would you like to give me a list of things that I can get for you when I have to go and do those things? So she said, yes, that would be very good. Okay. And then he asked her another question. So tell me, what else? So it comes out in this conversation. She doesn't say it right away, but it comes clear that Sue is concerned that Don goes to the river and leaves her with the 3 kids with the dangerous river, and he goes and talks to the fishermen, and for a while, and it's a pretty dangerous river. So that comes up, and they have this wonderful conversation, and between the 2 of them, they come up with a solution. And Sue, being the mother of 3 young children, doesn't have very much time to herself. So they agree that she can bring a fun book to read, and he will take the 3 kids on a walk, and yes, they'll go talk to the fishermen and all that, and then come back and have a picnic together, and then do something fun together as a family in the afternoon. Okay? So Sue is starting to feel a little bit better, but Don doesn't say, okay, we're going to the river now. No, he says, anything else. So it also happens that the list is a little bit longer. I'll just share one more thing with you. Sue feels that when they come back from the river, everybody scoots to their own place, and she's left with all this mess. Okay? So Don says, well, you know what? I think if you tell me where things go, because the truth of the matter is I really don't know where things go. If you point your way, we'll help put things away. So who do you think wanted to go to the river next time they went? Now, I want to end with a story that's not my story. It's a story that I heard from somebody else. But I'm going to tell it to you in first person. Okay? And here's what worries me about the story is that, I live here locally, and when you see me next time, you'll say, oh, Gregorio, that was a good story about the rabbit. Okay? Then I'm going to feel really bad. Okay? I'm going to feel really bad because the rabbit story really is really, really funny, but it's not my story. Okay? So I really rather hear from you, Gregorio, I tried the 3-minute listen and it worked. Okay? Or Gregorio, I did this and it worked. Okay? So when people tell me they like the rabbit story, I think that I failed. And here's the interesting point. When you go to a seminar like this one, you have 48 hours, plus or minus, to actually do something. See, you might say, oh, that was an interesting talk, maybe. You'll think that. The story about the rabbit was really worth the trip, right? I'm really building up the story, right? The whole thing was worth it, just for the story about the rabbit, right? Well, what research shows is that if you don't apply it, if you don't begin to practice, if you don't actually try it today, if you don't call a friend, a brother, a sister, a parent, or when your children come home today, if you don't apply some of these techniques, okay, then all you'll remember is this rabbit story. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to share this. Here it comes. During one of my sabbatical leaves, I was in our farm in San Javier, 7th region of Chile, and my daughter came crying to me and she says, "Papi, Papi, Dad, Dad, our dog almost ate Veronica's rabbit." So that's not a good thing. Veronica is a city girl from Santiago who, this young lady moved right by our farm, and she's got a property right next to our farm. So I talked to my wife and said, she's a young lady, it's better if you talk to her than I talk to her. Would you mind saying to her, telling her, Veronica, keep your rabbit in the cage. We're here in the farm area, and it's, they get eaten otherwise, right? The rabbits. And so my wife agreed. I don't know how good a communicator I was, because 2 weeks later, early Saturday morning, I was coming back from the shop, and here comes our dog wagging his tail at 100 miles an hour, and in his mouth is this very, very muddy dead rabbit. So I woke up, I walked to the bedroom where I told you it was early Saturday morning, my wife was still sleeping, and I walk in there and I say, "Honey, did you talk to Veronica?" A single tear came out. Guys, that means no. I started walking away. I'm a little bit of a coward, and I didn't know how. This woman loved this rabbit. She loved this animal. So I turned around again and I said, "Honey, would you talk to Veronica?" Lots of tears came out. I said no with an exclamation mark. So, I couldn't return the rabbit to her like this. So right by the kitchen area of our farm, there's a big sink in there, and I put the rabbit in, and I began to wash it carefully. I got some shampoo, and I washed the rabbit. I give it a good bath, very beautiful black and white fur. And then I take my oldest daughter's hair dryer, and I start drying up this rabbit so it looks really cute. And I take a shoebox and I put the rabbit in the shoebox, and I start walking towards Veronica's home. I'm a scaredy cat. I turned around. I couldn't do it. I said, "You know what? She's still sleeping. I'm sure I am going to go and return the rabbit a different way." So I went. I climbed the fence with a step ladder that we have right there. I'm going to climb the fence, go into her property, and I opened the cage. I put the little rabbit in there. I put his head between the legs, like if he was taking a little siesta, a little nap. I closed the cage, and I get out there as fast as I can, hopefully not being seen. Well, an hour later, Veronica must have woken up, and she started screaming and shouting. And I thought to myself, if I don't come over and ask her what the matter is, she's going to think I did it. So I climb up this step, and I lean over the fence, and I go, "Veronica, you're screaming, you're shouting. what in the world happened? She said, Gregorio, you won't believe this. Yesterday, my little rabbit died. I buried it and now it's back in the cage. Okay, now, this book that you're going to get also, the chapter 4, well, the whole book is on the web free. Okay? So all you have to do is do a search called Party Directed Mediation, and you can download the whole book. But you can also download chapter 4 if you want to share chapter 4 with others. And Kelly has enough copies for all of you to take one with you so you can read chapter 4. So it's been a real pleasure being here. And I don't know, are there any questions that anybody has before we finish? Yes, I'm going to be staying around if anybody wants to come and chat with me. So thank you very much.